Several years ago, I had this idea pop into my mind that I thought was stellar and amazing. And so I spent several days putting this proposal together, and I went to a businessman that I knew and I said, "Hey, I want you to look at this." And he said, "Well, give me the long and the short of it." And I shared it with him. And it had to do with the funding of college scholarships. And when this businessman looked at it, his eyes brightened up. He said, "This is pretty amazing. I'm all in. Let's do this thing." So I got pretty excited myself because the venture would have brought in about $200,000 profit per month. And so I got really excited, and this guy's on board. And a couple of days later, he calls me up and he says, "Hey, let me stop. Let me put this before the town council. Let me go to my councils in my town and let me clarify this. Let's make sure that we're not going to find any kind of resistance on this matter." To make a long story short, a few days later, he called me back and said, "This is a no-go. We have to cancel the whole deal." Now, if the Lord would have snapped his fingers, then I would have immediately become a very rich human being. The reason being is because the Bible tells us that God creates the rich. God creates the wealthy. And so many times you will find a scenario where the Lord just snaps his fingers, and because of his favor and bestowed blessing and for his purposes, he just gives someone a lot more resources than the rest. But if that's not you, if your fortune doesn't turn on a dime, if you're not just inheriting it, or if the Lord hasn't blessed your very first attempt at a business and magnified it, then you might be on the slow, long road to accumulating wealth. So that brings me to a point that for a person to become a millionaire through the saving and investing process, it is a very difficult and long road, as I've already mentioned. So one has to begin to cut expenses. So instead of driving a new car, maybe you decide to drive a used car. And instead of living in a nice neighborhood, maybe you decide to live in a fixer-upper instead. And then instead of buying premier clothing, maybe you go to Goodwill and you buy you some secondhand clothing that still looks nice. And you begin to adjust your lifestyle. Now, we know from all of the millionaires out there that have been interviewed that weren't the snap your finger millionaires, that a lot of these guys became wealthy through cutting back, through discipline, through hard saving, through sacrifice. Well, as I was pondering these things, I remember one day when the light came on, bam, big as the sun, that there is hardly any difference at all between the poor Christian and the rich millionaire who got there through hard labor or hard work or hard investing. And here's the scenario. So we work for invisible funds. Now, in our day and age, yes, a lot of times we get dollar bills. And if you're a businessman, maybe you get paid at times in dollar bills. So let's say you do a reconstruction project on somebody's house, or a construction project in their bathroom, or remodeling project. They might give you $1,000, $1,500, $3,000 in cash. But how often do we work for paychecks that are basically invisible? We get a piece of paper that states on there how much was transferred to our bank account, or maybe we even get a digital flash on our screen anymore that tells us how much money was deposited into our account. So these are just flashes of digital. And if the process for the millionaire was, let's say they worked hard and they were receiving these invisible paychecks as well, then those invisible paychecks would be going into an invisible bank account that's, all kept up with electronically. And they would know their value based on some invisible qualities. Well, as a Christian, do we not base some of our value on invisible qualities? And that's what this video series is about. It is the Christian millionaire. Like, are Christians millionaire-ish in any kind of fashion? And so a Christian that gets invisible money and then invest it invisibly in the church is investing it into an invisible bank account that he might not see currently. Now, what's the difference between that and the millionaire who works at a job? He's a good paying job, but he invests his money into an invisible bank account. The only difference at the end of the month is he can see a figure on paper that the Christian cannot see on paper. But the millionaire trusts that it's in the bank, while the Christian trusts that his reward is in heaven. Further similarities between the two is that a millionaire might base their value upon their perceived worth, like, I am worth something because of this invisible quality over here. Well, the Christian could do the same thing. The Christian can say, hey, I am worth something because of my invisible bank account that is in heaven. But you might think, no, well, that's not the only reason I'd really like to become a Christian millionaire. Like, I'd like some of the benefits of it. Well, if you go analyze the lives of real diehard millionaires who got it honest, not that the other ones didn't get it honest, but you know what I'm saying, like, they worked hard for it. If you look at the life of that kind of millionaire, they, after about 10 or 15 years of cutting back, of saving, of building resources, they get into a lifestyle of saying, hey, I can live this way the rest of my life. After you have spent 30 years saving and not buying new clothes, you're kind of in that habit that you're never going to buy new clothes because that profit just goes into somebody else's bank account. Well, what's the difference between them choosing to do that and the Christian that can't choose to do otherwise? Now, you could say there's the freedom of choice there, but anytime that a Christian does a good deed, he could actually count that as money in the bank. So if a Christian stops on the side of the road to help someone to get to the next exit, or helps them to make a phone call, or helps them change their spare tire, he could say, that's worth a service call, so that was probably worth about $250 in Christian merit up in heaven. I can bank on that. Or I stopped to help teach a class this past week, and it took 5 hours to prepare for that. Instead of 5 hours investing in the stock market, I spent 5 hours investing in the kingdom, so I can actually count that money as being in the bank of heaven. But you'd be like, some people might be like with the Christian millionaire concept, but I want to spend the money. But you don't understand that the millionaires that got it hard don't spend the money. They don't walk around in luxury. They continue to scrimp and save and live very frugally in their life, and they penny pinch. Well, if you're a penny pinching Christian because you're giving your resources to the church and your time to other people, and you don't have time to make extra money, then bank on your value being in heaven. Just like the millionaire says, hey, I trust that I am of value in this world because of my bank account over here. The Christian can have the same sort of faith and say, I am worth something because of what I have invested in the future of heaven. You see, both of them are believing in the value of invisible concepts, and there's very little difference between the two. Put your value and trust in the Lord and see if He doesn't strengthen your heart to the point where you go, if the millionaire can live without luxuries, then so can I, but I can't live without joy. That's why I put my faith and trust in Jesus Christ.